Josh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on this call today. And just to introduce, you are AI and automation product manager at Zencargo. So what does that role involve?
It involves a lot, and it feels like it's constantly shifting. If you ask me this question in a couple of weeks' time, I feel like it might change. So being involved on the product side of things, fundamentally, I'd see the role of a product manager within the organization fundamentally being the same. We still need to be the voice of stakeholders. We still need to understand business objectives and priorities and coordinate many different departments and teams to make sure we're all moving in the same direction. The change and the shift that I've experienced over the past year or so is how AI and automation now are starting to play a major role internally and within the supply chain industry. And having to adapt and move so quickly with these technologies, that would be the biggest change and what has differed over the past year or so. But fundamentally, in terms of products, I still kind of see that as being the same in the core as or it always has been.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you talked about this being an element of removing friction from different departments as well. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, so that really just ties into our North Star here at Zencargo. So our road to 2030 is to automate the supply chain. So we will have an autonomous supply chain by then. Fundamentally, to have that autonomous supply chain means we need to be removing manual steps within the supply chain process. That's the way in which we're looking at reducing friction. We're looking at reducing bottlenecks, the amount of time it takes humans to actually go in and action a specific workflow or the next step on that particular shipment or whatever's actually going on at that given time. And therefore, by moving towards our North Star of automating supply chain, we can really get into a world of changing the way that operators actually interact with freight and supply chain, where they're just being able to oversee what it is that AI and automation is doing, starting to move into a world of handling, managing relationships and exceptions rather than doing more admin tasks, which has been the case in the past. So that's kind of how we're seeing that friction, just in terms of the human involvement and interaction on within the shipment process.
So yeah, you talked about the North Star, and I get the impression that eventually you're looking for one connected system. And at the moment, it sounds like you're stitching pieces together just to make that sort of vision become a reality.
Yeah. So if the goal for 2020 was to prove AI and automation within the supply chain context, obviously we know that these technologies work, but we are very much at the forefront of actually implementing them within our industry. 2026 is really making sure that we have the guardrails and the operational processes and maturity in place to make sure that they can scale, and to do so with the visibility and human in the loop element, which we need to make that a reality. We started off last year really defining the areas where AI and automation can have the most value on the different products and the areas within the business. And exactly what you were just describing, we are now starting to take those areas which we are seeing the most impact and tying them into our orchestrator layer, which is what we're having multiple different AI products which are feeding data into orchestrator. And later on in the year, we'll start to be moving into a world of expanding orchestrator's outputs into different services of the business as well. An ongoing process on both fronts.
I'm sure we can get incredibly technical, but what areas have you seen greater success so far in your initial efforts?
Yeah, so really twofold. And this is kind of where we have been doubling down in terms of our strategies so far. So AI and automation is only ever going to be as good as the data which is built on. So we made this strategic decision to really focus on that area last year. And so the biggest impacts that we've seen have been in what we're calling Luca Scan, our document parser product. So this is really us training and fine tuning models to work within a supply chain specific context. Document parsing might not sound the most interesting, but when you are really working across so many different document types, across all languages across the globe, across different standards, it becomes very, very challenging. It's not just a case of just your standard, like receipt maybe, which can be very structured and we're in the same sort of format. But we're also looking at the same process of taking unstructured data from emails. So all 30 third-party communications, which we have across all users, which we work with, so our suppliers, our customers. Every time these emails come in and send us unstructured data, structuring it, sending it into our orchestrator, and so we can start to get downstream automations on the back of those as well. So yeah, the ingestion layer of orchestrator is what is going to feed, ultimately empower orchestrator to automate the supply chain.
And so much of the conversations we've had at Able with mid-market firms is that they realize the foundational work should have happened after they started the work towards automation and agents. In this case, it feels like a bit of a deliberate process. You kind of knew up front that you needed to do this.
Well, I'd say we knew up front we needed to do this because of the errors and the mistakes that we made along the way. I think we
Oh,
also fell into that trap. But from August last year, we made the strategic decision that, yeah, this is what we have learned. If we are going to make a success of this, this is how we are going to make it a reality. And so we put a transformation plan in place. And the data ingestion, hygiene, and transformation was just the first step of that. Sounds like we might have also fell into some of the same pitfalls, but once we recognized the mistakes we made, we made a plan to rectify it.
are there any particular instances that jar in your memory thinking, God, I wish I could go back and change that from happening in the first instance?
Yes, absolutely. And there was a couple of projects which we worked on probably for longer than we should have done. I think that's natural. They might have potentially just fallen into the sunken cost fallacy at that point, but I think that's as part of a learning process. Ultimately, these are new technologies. Creating a playbook in this industry for AI and automation, which hasn't been done before, so these mistakes are going to be made. I think it's not so much the fact that there are mistakes; it's your ability to pivot and to learn from them. And I think we're on the right path now on the back of those mistakes.
Okay. And you talked about obviously there's the foundational work getting your databases systems aligned, and that's critical given the industry you work in. You also mentioned in terms of ingesting emails and making sense of those. And that seems to be perhaps a little bit more ambitious than what we've seen with other firms that work in this space. It's sort of moving it to the next level as well.
Yeah. So inherently, the supply chain industry, I think, in part because it is so global, and when you're talking about a global industry which has to work across multiple different countries, which have their own, software and hardware limitations, it does mean that communication is very old school. And so changing the way that third party communications, both inbound and outbound, is going to be fundamental to our success. And so we decided to make the decision to work on inbound communications first, just because that's how we can take unstructured data, make it structured and make it actionable. But ultimately, the next step along this journey is for the orchestrator layer to then know when it needs to start triggering outbound communications as well. So if we need a specific data point because we need to capture that before we can get a ship on or a container on a ship, we need our AI to recognize that this is a decision that needs to be made, and then to trigger that email. And then once we have that level of intelligence within Orchestrator, there's no reason why we can't start to spin that out into different communication methods as well outside of email. So it could be if our clients want to work on Microsoft Teams or Slack, we could have the same level of inbound and communication, or inbound and outbound communication intelligence as well.
Okay, so I guess you're saying that the industry has quite a sort of archaic way of communicating sort of processes, information, data, etc. And this varies depending on country and perhaps organization you're working with. Email probably has quite a lot of that embedded, but I guess it's also got a lot of very human signals too. And from what I can read into this, it's like you're giving it the ultimate challenge first to work that part out, and then the rest of it potentially could be a bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's exactly what we was describing earlier about the roadmap, focusing on the data foundations of the ingestion and transformation of our data first. Ultimately, the downstream automation is going to live or die on the quality of the data which comes into it. So yeah, that's why we made that decision to focus on the inbound emails first.
This orchestration layer, I just wanted to, I want to talk about the human handoff and the way humans work still, but I'm interested just to talk a little bit about the orchestration layer. So without getting too technical, what is this orchestration layer? I mean, is it ultimately going to be a system that adapts over time? I'd love to get a bit more of a sense of what that is, what you build. Is that something you build internally or something you brought in as well?
Yeah, so this is essentially the brains of what we're doing with AI within Zencargo. And this is what we are calling as Luca. This is really the AI product which is going to define our success in that North Star. So this is where we are working with models and fine-tuning models so that we can make artificial intelligence understand what needs to be done on a shipment context. So for instance, to go to the human element that you're describing. So if a booking comes in and says we need to get X goods from somewhere in China and we need to get them to London. Once we get that booking, let's say that came through from email, we need our orchestration layer to to figure out the intent. The AI needs to see that email and go, this person has requested a booking. That means that in order for us to progress this, our Luca Product orchestrator needs to understand the intent and go, I need to figure out and go to the booking service. It will then send the information to the booking service, get a response back. And that could just be, we can't progress this booking because of whatever reason. In that case, or Luca would figure out, okay, I need to send an email and request more information, or it can continue the process and continue that automation from there. So yeah, but this is how we are going to transition our staff from the daily admin tasks that they are working on at the moment to supervising and overseeing the automation within the supply chain.
Luca, I love the name, by the way. I mean, so many of the firms that we speak to, finding that they have very specific needs, they're unique. So in a lot of cases, the outside vendor solutions are relevant. Maybe elements of them are at the back end, efficiency savings. It sounds like you've taken that former approach. You had to build something to be able to fit in with what you do at Zencargo.
Yeah, we did. And in part, just because of the volatility of this industry, this is the biggest challenge that we've faced from our journey so far. So there are so many different parties and so many different variables involved in the supply chain process that so many things can go wrong and completely unforeseen things can go wrong. So the most famous example, of course, is the notorious worst case of parallel parking in history, where the container ship blocked the Suez Canal, and we now have to divert all our containers and manage the expectations of our customers around Africa rather than the shorter route through the Mediterranean. That's obviously just a one-off example, but these are the real world issues that we have to deal with. And so that meant, because of this complexity, we felt that there was nothing in the market which is going to be able to have the supply chain context to be able to understand and react to these. So we had to make the decision that this is something that we're going to have to do internally if we want to achieve our direction. One of the issues that we had found, actually tying into your question earlier when you were saying about the projects that we worked on in the past, the learnings that we took from them. One of the problems that we really found on some of those projects, which we decided that we need to pivot away from, is that because there are so many complexities within this industry, automation and AI just wasn't able to deal with them. And so even while we were trying to focus on the happy path and deliver automations to our operators teams as quickly as possible, of course, that is the goal. But it just, frankly, the AI and automation just couldn't figure out the context and what to do given the amount of variables which had to go into those particular processes. And that is why that also fed into the decision of, going back to the beginning, focus on the data ingestion and focusing there, just because, there's nothing available off the shelf. We have to figure this out internally.
Well, this is going to make a great case study. And it sounds like you're fairly onwards in the process. So you probably had to think about what skills do we have in-house that can get us there? And then you had to think about ways in which you can bring in the partners you work with and get them trained up. And there's also the cultural aspect too, isn't there? Sort of understanding how people work, so perhaps having advisory sessions with them, getting an understanding of their needs and their roles, so you can make sure the system is built in a way that reflects the way you work. What would you say was the hardest out of those three areas?
Well, we're very fortunate. Well, I certainly am very fortunate on the product side to have the full support and backing of management. So one of our goals this year is to be known as the AI freight forwarder. We are differentiating ourselves within the marketplace based off of our interaction and the way in which we work with AI. That isn't just based on the products and the technologies which I've been describing so far. That is very much an organizational shift. So one of the KPIs that we have internally is to make sure that X percentage of departments within the organization are using AI in their workflows, and also the percentage of the people in the business that are using AI as well. So it's not just in terms of how we build products and technologies, it's also just fundamentally leveraging AI across the organization. That makes my job a lot easier, but because we have that buy-in from management and that steering and direction. The problem that you were describing in terms of getting people trained, making sure they are up to speed, they know what AI and automation is doing, that is of course a problem. And that is, I would say, where things haven't changed from my answer at the beginning. Those are still core problems that product managers have to interact with and engage with. Human nature isn't going to change because of these technologies. We need to make sure we take people on the journey. AI can be quite scary as well. So we need to make sure that we are not trying to replace jobs. That isn't the goal here. What we're trying to do is to allow our operators to be spending their time on the high value issues rather than just laborious manual tasks and admin. So really making sure that we are touching base with them. They have the full understanding of the audit trail of everything that AI and automation is doing. They need to have the human in the loop element. They need to be able to step in and interact if something goes wrong. Something will go wrong. That is how AI works. We've accepted that we can only get to a certain level of success because of how AI is fundamentally built. Therefore, we need to make sure that the controls and the guardrails in place. So our goals for 2026, operationalizing these and scaling how we leverage AI and automation. We accept that the errors will take place, but we are building in auditability by design to make sure that they can pick up those errors as early as possible and to mitigate any problems that it actually causes. But these are very much problems that have existed within software and technology for the past 30 years or so. I don't see these as being inherent to AI in the way in which we work with it, but it's just it's a human problem. We need to make sure that we are doing the correct change management to bring the entire organization along.
You mentioned before that there's a lot of admins, a lot of making sense of different systems. So I'm sure that a lot of folks were pretty receptive to the idea that it could free up from a lot of that, probably quite frustrating elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that one of the good things about the approach and direction that we've taken, it shows very quick benefits. So for instance, for the email project that we've been working on, by taking that unstructured data, making it structured, putting it directly onto the platform, these people are seeing the things that they had to do. It's quite just a tedious piece of work, just copying and pasting, but that's done for them. They don't have to worry about it anymore. We're taking the attachments directly from emails, uploading it to the correct shipment. Again, that information is already done for them because our Luca product is already starting to make suggestions based on that data, both in terms of corrections and potential optimizations. Again, they're now starting to feel the benefit of it. So I would say that it definitely becomes easier when it moves away from being theoretical and this is what we're going to do, starting to show the impact and making sure that they can see and actually crucially just trust that impact. They can see that it's working to X degree and they can feel like they can step in when they need to is crucial as well.
So it's great that you've got the support of management and so few have that sort of leadership that is aware and supportive in that way. What have they done that's sort of pushed the needle for you in terms of helping you in your efforts? Are they leading from the front? Are they doing sort of some of the work themselves, demonstrating what's the potential?
They're certainly setting the direction of the organization. So the expectation internally is that to become the AI freight forwarder, we need to be leveraging these technologies and tools across the board. Again, it's not just a software thing. They are very active to get involved in making sure that we have everything that we need to be able to move at pace as well. So when they are required to step in, they will do so. And they are very hands-on in doing so as well, should the need arise. So I suppose it's, again, this is kind of an example of where things haven't changed actually, despite the new technologies. Giving the teams the autonomy to be able to make decisions on the direction, how to achieve the organization's goals. I think they do a good job of recognizing that we need to allow teams to come up with solutions to problems. But should the need arise to step in and to push things along, then they'll absolutely get involved and get their hands dirty. Should that need arise?
To me, from what you've said before about the case with the Suez Canal getting blocked, it seems to me that we're living in a more chaotic time than ever. You can never predict the way world events are flowing. In some respects, being able to move to automation this way is perhaps the best guarantee to be able to manage that, because it doesn't sound to me like it's a cost savings exercise. And like you said, it's not about replacing jobs. It's about being able to respond to potential events and real-time decisions much more efficiently.
Yes, that is one of the outcomes, but ultimately, if we can reduce the amount of manual touch points each shipment has, we can also increase our files per head, so the amount of shipments per operator, which we can handle at any given time. If we can handle more shipments, of course, it means we can increase our revenue. So it definitely does tie into business goals as well. And of course, one of the things, some of the examples which I gave, taking away these manual steps, these are the concrete ways in which we are making that happen. So ways in which we are measuring this and actually seeing the business value. We're measuring the percentage of the total data fields which have come from an automated source versus a human source. Of course, we're trying to increase that. We're measuring the amount of times that documents are being automatically uploaded and then creating suggestions. These are all examples of time which we have saved. And therefore, that is what's going to be one of the main drivers to increasing our revenue, because we're going to be able to increase our internal productivity as well.
Okay, so I'm just digging into a bit more of that human in the loop element, which I find fascinating. This is an industry where decisions are moving incredibly fast. You've got a shipment moving, systems need clearing, a haulier might need an answer. So where do humans fit into this process now, and where do you want humans to fit in the process as you've got the orchestration layer connected?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Earlier on, I mentioned about the transformation journey. So the way in which we've mapped this out is in 4 different stages. So we have the data foundations and ingestion, which we talked about so far a lot. The next step along that journey for us is the visibility and trust. And this is one of the major initiatives for us within 2026. We need to take into account the ways in which operators actually use the platform already and use the technology. We need to make sure that we are surfacing the information that they need at the right place at the right time. Fundamentally, these are just best practice UX principles. These haven't really changed. What has changed is probably just the amount of potential noise which we could be sending to operators. One of the lines which we're having to tread lightly on is, how do we define sending lots of information and noise to operators, and then they're just going to blank it out because it's going to be too much, and then making sure we're actually sending what is useful at the right time. That's a challenge which we're currently figuring out, and just trying to. There's been examples when we've probably gone both ways. It's a case of fine tuning it. But yeah, fundamentally, we need to make sure we are embedding into operators' daily working lives and their processes, following the best UX principles to show what they need to know and when, and just giving them the option to also step in. That will really go in more detail in the third step of the transformation journey, which is partnership. That is when we're really starting to automate predictions, risks, optimization capabilities in the platform and true scale as well. But yeah, we need to make sure we get that visibility and trust element first, because otherwise, if we start to automate these actions beforehand, we're just going to be automating mistakes.
It sounds like you've got a North Star and you've got a framework you're working towards, which is giving you that pathway. So you're learning from the business, learning from the partners, and then orchestrating that into solutions which are relevant. And sort of the UX layer is something you're thinking now, but is that a sort of constant? Is that sort of how long is a piece of string thing? Are you constantly evolving that?
Yeah, well, honestly, that's probably still early doors. For the products which we have worked on, we have been looking at ways we can showcase that AI has done. As we really start to roll out an orchestrator at a much bigger scale and start to piece these data ingestion products together as well, that's going to be a lot of data. So one of the challenges which we are working on at the moment is how we can surface that all in a way which is meaningful. We don't have that yet, but that is very much a challenge that we know we need to overcome if we are going to ever get to the third step of that transformation journey, really working on partnership. So we took the approach of proving the technologies and the use cases. It's now got to the point of that is working. We've got a lot of data. We really need to start to surface that. And that's one of our big challenges for 2026.
I guess you mentioned before, a lot of folks are still doing the work that they always did in the same way. And actually getting that UX layer is probably the piece in the puzzle to get them to think, hang on a second, this is really relevant.
Yeah, exactly. That's really when the engagement with different parts of the business really starts to snowball in my mind as well, because that's when it becomes really visible to them, the power and the benefits that this automation is going to have for them. That's when they're really going to actually see the difference from, this is just what I've been hearing by management, by people like myself in terms of the vision and the direction that we're going to go to, but to, okay, this is how it actually affects me. And I can see that I can benefit from this as well, and really bring on the organization into that journey, because fundamentally it's a net positive for them as well.
Are you also adjusting the way the organization moves around training? Also, maybe in terms of recruitment too, getting the right people in that fit with this objective that you've got?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in recruitment, so our HR team is changing the tools and the systems that they use. So a part of the different departments which are leveraging AI, that is happening in the HR department. But we've also started to change our hiring processes and the questions which we ask candidates about AI as well. So we now want people to show us what they use with AI. We don't try and hide away or if a developer, for instance, is using AI to build a solution as a technical test, we encourage that. We want them to use AI. The question isn't a case of using AI or not. It's really making sure that they have the skills and the understanding to know exactly what's going on under the hood. And that's kind of one of the examples in which we have changed our interview process to focus on AI. We encourage it. We want it to happen. We just need to make sure that people have the knowledge and the skills to back up what they're actually delivering as well.
So it's technical prerequisite. And would you say there's a sort of need for a sort of mindset around curiosity, what AI can do, being flexible to change? Because like you said, things are moving so quickly all the time.
Yeah, well, I would kind of say that uh, this is something which is now across the board. This is definitely not just a software issue now. This is having a passion for learning and a curiosity to understand how you can better leverage these tools is something that we are trying to embed across the organization. That really ties into that becoming the AI freight forwarder in 2026. It's something which I've been doing as well. So you talked about training. One of our product managers has been trying to upskill by understanding how to leverage AI to learn coding, and it's basically built a academy slash university product, so we can start to train both internally and externally on our platform and our systems. And then the next layer of that, outside of that immediate benefit, is also starting to have courses on AI within the freight forwarding and supply chain context as well.
Fascinating. So it sounds to me like you've got definite structure behind that in terms of training and bringing people along for the journey. In terms of your role, we mentioned before, talking about the friction that you spend a lot of time removing. How much of your time is spent on keeping people aligned in that journey that you see the North Star? How much effort do you keep in pointing different departments in the right direction?
It certainly helps by having management engagement and support. They're always pushing the organization in the right direction. I think that purely anecdotally, from my own career experience, Zencargo as an organization probably does that better than some of the other organizations I've worked with in the past. Certainly, it's a strategic level. At an operational and tactical day to day level, that can start to break down as people start to get into the nitty gritty of what they do and start to think about things from a narrower lens. So at a high level, I say that it works well within an organization. But of course, when it comes to day to day, you do have to bring people along. It's just another example of product, a product manager role still being a product manager role, despite the new technology.
We talked earlier about how Zencargo is focused on building tools in house. Some of the other folks that we've spoken to have said that they take a sort of perspective that if there's a tool that they can bring in that will do the job perhaps better than what they could develop quickly, they kind of go for the vendor tool. Does sort of third party vendors play any role at all in sort of the lesser important areas of the business or the less strategic areas?
Yeah, we do. Of course, we do. So we will always still look for solutions from the market for a specific problem and to see if there is something that we can get off the shelf or buy from a third party rather than doing it ourselves. For a lot of the core journeys on what we do, we find that can be just challenging. But yeah, it's definitely the first port of call. We of course want to make sure that if there are specialists in specific areas that we can leverage and partner with, then yeah, we do take that approach as well.
Are there any particular areas that they do work with you and any sort of ones you can name? Not tools, but sort of areas of focus in the business.
Yeah, well, so there are some tools which we are looking at the moment. Is kind of to do with kind of aggregation of API layers.
Okay.
Again, just because it's a global industry, so many different organizations have their own APIs and their own systems. If we can have one integration rather than multiple, that just saves us so much time and maintenance costs. So we prefer to go down that approach in that specific scenario. Yeah, even in these regards, I guess it kind of ties into the problems that we have on the supply chain industry.
And is there awareness when you're bringing these third-party tools in, the API orchestration was one of them, it's making sure that it Does it need to be able to plug into that overall layer that you're creating? And if so, how does that sort of impact the way you interrogate these vendor solutions? You have to be quite careful in that respect.
Yeah, it does. We need to make sure that any data which we have is accessible to us in the way that we need it to be, so that we can make sure that any downstream automation can use it. We need to make sure that if they are going to be sending us data, it's of good quality. Again, that transformation and cleansing, which I was describing earlier,
Yeah.
is paramount. But that's just a part of uh, the tender process, and just going and working with them and figuring out, are these guys genuinely suitable for our needs, or is it just a case of they can do something, but we're just going to accumulate problems in the long run?
And it sounds to me like you've got a structured process, which has avoided a lot of issues that mid-market firms that we speak to have, which is different departments buying different tools and tool sprawl and making things more complex than they should be. Would you say that's correct?
Potentially, I won't speak to the market, but I would say that Occam's razor still applies with these new technologies. If you can find a simpler solution, it will probably be the better one. And so we take that principle into account when we're looking for third parties and any companies that we can partner with, especially on the technology side of things.
Just to wrap this up, if a product manager said, I want to start automating with AI, but don't know where to begin, what one piece of advice would you give that most people get wrong?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, like, I understand. I was in a similar boat last year when I started Zencargo. The shift to leveraging AI and automation, I think, is both a technological and a transformational shift. The transformational shift is going to be a lot easier if you can prove value of using AI and automation is in any given area to begin with. And so what we found when we was looking at how we are going to leverage these technologies last year, when it became obvious, or when we realized the areas which was going to have value, there was definitely a light bulb moment when we thought, oh, okay, we could actually be moving into a whole new world if we double down in this area. And so I would just say, look for those areas, just play around with it. You don't have to get it right. And when you realize you found something which could be really powerful, you will get that light bulb moment. And then if you can prove that value, that makes the transformational shift internally so much easier. So I would just say, just give it a go. Start small. If you can see some value in something, follow that path rather than going on too many different routes. And if you find the area where it's powerful, then you will get a light bulb moment.
And just finally, it sounds to me in terms of HR, in terms of the hiring criteria, they should get more folks like you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I'll let them be the judge of that.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, for speaking with us, and look forward to catching up again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.